Childbirth is a transformative event for many families and a way for many cultures to be transferred to the next generation. Postpartum cultural practice all over the world focus on rest for the mother, including France and their pelvic floor therapy sessions, Finland and their baby box, and Nigeria and the Omigawa hot water massages. But one of the oldest postpartum cultural practices in the world is China's doing the month, or otherwise known as Zuoyatsu, and it's often seen as very restrictive and foreign to many Westerners. However, today we will be exploring the cultural heritage practice of doing the month and why it can be applied to other cultures or other locations. In exploring Zoyatsu and its cultural practice of Chinese heritage, we will thus be able to enhance the accessibility of the heritage practice. Today, our three guiding research projects and questions for the day will be: what are the basics of doing the month and their practices? How would a Chinese immigrant mother do the month, or Zuyatse, in a place like Sweden, which is a Western country? And how may a Westerner who is not from China do the month with a Chinese partner? A crucial element of Zuyatse is found in the Taoism religion, a religion that also is one of the pillars of Chinese societies and the cultural practices seen in China. In Taoism, there is the essence of yin and yang. Yin and yang both represent different parts of everyday life, such as cold and heat. Pregnancy is seen as a yang state, while childbirth is seen as a yin state. After childbirth, it is seen that there is not enough yang, and therefore the whole part of Zoyatsu is to restore the yang, and therefore, with this equilibrium of yin and yang, the body is less likely to be vulnerable to diseases postpartum. As you can see with this diagram, yang as an essential essence for postpartum Zoyatsu is associated with heat. Thus, the hot foods are so essential to the practice to increase vasodilation, but to also regain balance. Yin, on the other hand, is seen with cold, which explains the avoidance of cold water and cold air. Another reason why many mothers in China will choose to do Zoyatsu for the 30 days is because when China had a high infant mortality, the first 30 days of life and the baby survivability of that time often meant that the baby would be able to live into adulthood. It is also highly believed in China that the first few years of life dictates the health for the rest of the life. For example, the quote of a Chinese mother doing Zoyatsu says 30 days will pass more quickly than 30 years. And this emphasizes how even though the 30 days of confinement may be hard for mothers, the payoff of their child's life being healthier is worth it. Another main reason that many Chinese mothers may choose to do Zoyatsu is because of the intergenerational practice of it. Inherently, your grandmother and mother-in-law will be helping you, and because of the filial piety found in many Chinese cultures, women often feel pressured. Additionally, there is just a sense of cultural identity associated with it, with the mother's identity and her practices in postpartum, as seen with Lowenthal's readings. A mother's identity therefore gets transferred to the children's and therefore the next generations. Zayatsu also might have increased over the past few decades because of the one-child policy generation being mothers now. For instance, people with siblings more often know how to take care of a child than those who are only childs, but this only child generation doesn't know how to take care of a child as much as those who were not part of said generation. Therefore, mothers-in-laws, grandmothers, or even postpartum nannies can actually be crucial to the care of the mother and child during this time period. Lastly, mothers might choose this postpartum practice simply because it allows time for the mother and child to rest, as they are most vulnerable during this time period. Now we will get into the basic practices of Chinese confinement. The main Chinese confinement practice is the general idea of 30 days of health through the diet. The diet consists of mainly hot foods, which, as you can see with the diagram beside, increases vasodilation for milk production and circulation, and as seen with Harrison with the interconnection of ontology and heritage, there is also the idea of religion and yang revitalization through the diet. Another major reason why diet is seen as so important in Zuyatsu is because during childbirth, a woman loses a lot of blood and other liquids, and therefore she is seen as the most vulnerable during the stage while she is trying to regain her strength. Therefore, the hot foods that cause vasodilation can also make up for this blood loss through circulation, and high proteins and high fatty acids can help with her regaining strength in itself.
Give you more iron. One of the most important things to consume during confinement is red date tea. This tea is said to be full of many benefits for new mothers, from boosting milk supply and blood circulation to calming nerves, relieving pain, reducing water retention, and preventing anemia.
This is today's tea. So this is the tea I drink pretty much every day, right?
It is believed that if a postpartum mother were to eat cold foods, that the mother would suffer with excessive yin, diarrhea, swelling, discomfort, aches, pain, and cough. Additionally, these symptoms are believed to be transferred thus to the baby because of lactation. And for these reasons, and for this importance of diet, the following and avoiding cold foods was the third most followed principle in a sample of mothers, and then followed by incense and no intercourse during this time. And so you can see that burning no incense and having no intercourse during these times, which are quite frankly no-brainers for a lot of Western people and are very important to postpartum care, then directly being followed by avoiding cold food, stresses the importance of diets in the Chinese belief of postpartum care. In our next session, we will now discuss the importance of hygiene and their cultural practices within Zoyatsu. In this practice, we will also see many of Smith's application of modern use of almost ancient heritage in this case. So in the past, there was no brushing of the hair, teeth, or washing the body during the postpartum stage. This was primarily because yin can get in through the loose skin, therefore the air and the water and the cold can get in through the loose skin and cause arthritis, rheumatism, swelling, cold, and headache. Additionally, the teeth in postpartum care were seen as very fragile, and so if someone were to brush their teeth during this time, it was believed that their teeth would fall out. However, we also can realize the historical context of this. During this postpartum care practice, we would often see people not having clean water in ancient times, and then we would also not see indoor plumbing and showering, which would allow for the mother to stay warm during this time. Because of the availability of clean water, indoor showers, heating, hair dryers, a lot of Chinese mothers actually choose to not follow this lack of hygiene practices during the postpartum care. It was actually seen as the least followed practice in a study on which practices in Zoyatsu mothers followed. And so now we heavily see the modern application and adaptation of ancient practices as seen in Smith's readings and writings. And so a lot of mothers will now boil the water with wine and ginger, which are both yang foods and therefore cause vasodilation, or they will boil such water with motherwort, which is also seen as a yang wort, and then afterwards they will also blow dry their hair. And so you will see this in Taylor R's video and how her nanny specifically went around the hygiene practice.
Pour the hot liquid into a bucket and bring that bucket into my shower. I was to use this portable shower head to shower my body.
Okay, yeah, just like that.
Incorporate traditional methods, but you apply them to the modern day more, I would say. So because we have heating in our house, we have hair dryers, I am allowed to wash my hair as long as I don't have the air conditioning on and I dry it right away so that I don't have any dampness or coldness around me. Yeah.
Such adaptations to Zoyatsu, as you've seen, is the reason why a lot of Western people are starting to become attracted to the postpartum practice. As you can see with this comment, people are impressed by how the cultural heritage practice that is thousands of years old allows for the flexibility and adaptation to modern practices. Now we discuss the behaviors of Zoyatsu. Primarily the idea of not going outside and having no non-familial visitors is practiced in Zoyatsu because of the idea that germs won't be allowed into the home if there are no visitors from the outside. However, a lot of women and families in general found this very isolating, and this was the second least followed guideline in the sample study. Additionally, there is the behavior of resting in bed and prioritizing sleep, and additionally prioritizing breastfeeding when possible due to the giving of food nutrients and yang to the child through the diet. Now we discuss the idea of belly wrapping in Zayatsu. And this also follows the idea of Lowenthal and selective heritage. Specifically, traditional Chinese medicine is now using Malaysian belly wrapping, which in itself can be adopting other heritage processes into the heritage itself of Chinese medicine. With belly wrapping, there is a cotton base and then a second tiered layer that is the Malaysian tying of the stomach. This is usually done for 17 days of the cycle, and in doing so, there is the goal of healing the abdominal wall, healing the back, pelvic floor, and then also placing the organs and skin back into place and tightening the skin. We must remember that this is emphasized because there is the belief that the skin is looser postpartum in Chinese cultures, and with looser skin, it is believed that wind and water and overall yin essences could enter the body during this vulnerable time and thus cause a lot of different diseases. And this belly wrapping actually does have some Western biomedical nuance to it. It is very similar to the fundal massages and pelvic floor exercises done postpartum to reduce hemorrhaging risk and also to restore the pelvic floor muscles.
The method that's popular in Hong Kong right now is called Beng Hung, and it's adopted from Malaysian cultural practices.
Oh my god.
Now that we have all of the basics down in traditional Chinese medicine and the practice of Zoyatsu, we can now talk about the study of Chinese immigrant experiences in Sweden practicing postpartum traditional Chinese medicine Zoyatsu. Specifically, this will relate to our course reading with Graham and the identity without a place in a globalized heritage world. So, the practice of Zoyatsu with these Chinese immigrant mothers in Sweden was mainly because of their mothers doing so, and therefore the passage of heritage and identity through mothers, as Graham has stated, the intergenerational support, and therefore the less isolating experience of being an immigrant in itself, and that isolating experience in a Western country, and the cultural identity link back to China in doing this practice. And so you also see the idea of Smith and the incorporation of present day and ancient heritage practices. For example, a lot of these Chinese mothers went in Swedish hospitals would use sage femmes, who are nurses, in addition to the poyettes, which are the traditional medicine doulas. In this way, the nurses helped settle health disparities, but also the traditional medicine doulas help support the practices of traditional Chinese medicine. Additionally, you also see Graham's idea of conflicting cultural beliefs and dissonance between Chinese mothers and their Swiss partners. And so in this, there was often arguments about how a Swiss man may see the family as a nuclear unit and therefore saw the mother-in-law or grandmothers or mothers living with them during this postpartum period as unnecessary. Meanwhile, for the Chinese woman, this was actually a very essential part of her heritage. Additionally, women felt a sense of heritage hierarchy. Whenever they were in the hospital, some women were actually forced slash pressured to take a shower immediately after birth, which was not in accordance with the hygiene proponent of traditional Chinese medicine, and there was no boiling of the water beforehand. Additionally, they were almost made to eat cold foods that wasn't with the idea of yang through the diet. And then, in opposition to that, the Chinese traditional medicine doula, poyettes, the mothers felt more culturally understood and comforted. And so, in that, you can see Graham's idea of heritage being inclusive and therefore a place of understanding and less isolation for an immigrant.
Yeah, overall, I was just always very reassured every step of the way, and that was really comforting.
The clip just seen and the clips before this point were all from Taylor R's video on her experience in postpartum care in China and the Zoyatsu process. Taylor R is a Canadian woman who moved to Hong Kong with her Chinese husband in 2022 and also had a child in 2022. As you can see, it is more common to hire a puyet, which is the confinement nanny you saw. It is also becoming more popular for Westerns to follow if they live in China, and therefore you can see the identity within a place in itself. And so the majority culture and their heritage influencing, at this instance, the minority culture of a Western immigrant. Additionally, there are likely more adaptations because of having no strict intergenerational traditions, such as this comment seen to the side. Additionally, that was also seen with how Taylor R was actually able to eat cold foods, such as certain fruits in her video, as long as they were kept at a neutral temperature. Meanwhile, this may not occur with someone who is Chinese born and in China with their Chinese relatives, and that intergenerational traditions focus on different parts of the practice specifically. Now I will discuss the research process for this final project on traditional Chinese confinement period of postpartum care. For my search results, I specifically looked up Chinese postpartum confinement, almost always in that exact phrasing, and unfortunately that could often lead to Anglo-centric results because I do not personally know any Chinese, but I know that there is a erasure of resources because of how I don't know any Chinese, and these search results, like I said, were very English centered. There also was the ethical issues in my project of how, because of this resource erasure, because of how Anglo-centric it is, there is a possibility that at any time in this project I could have accidentally simplified a process or may have completely even skipped over one on accident because I do not have the resources to actually have a full in-depth research on Chinese traditional medicine without knowing Chinese in itself. The reason why I chose this course topic is mainly twofold. First off, I want to be personally an OBGYN and find a lot of value in cultural medicine. And second off, I believe that because this traditional Chinese medicine practice is followed throughout the world in different variations or directly through Chinese traditional medicine, it shows that heritage isn't tied to one specific place, and in fact, it is always evolving, and the place in itself can always be evolving, or it can occur in diasporas as seen with the Chinese mother experiences in Sweden. And there are actually many different course engagement in this topic and what we have just discussed. So specifically, women forming the identity for generations as seen in Lowenthal's reading, and how an identity is most likely to be formed within a mother, but heritage in itself does not often include a mother because of the marginalization of women in history. And then we also see the diasporic and immigrant heritage often seen in the identity of a place and general heritage being tied to a place in the past and not as much anymore with globalization. We also see heritage dissonance and appreciation, the duology of both of that, in the Chinese immigrant experience of using both traditional medicine and that cultural understanding, but also having some dissonance in how these Swedish hospitals or Swedish partners may have addressed traditional medicine as possibly inferior or superstitious in some cases. Additionally, we also see heritage interacting with cultural ontology as seen in Harrison and Native American heritage. The actual heritage process of eating the diets and having specific behaviors to uphold yang and balance out the yin is very much rooted in religion and therefore ontology, and therefore you see the intersection of cultural ontology and heritage practices. There are actually many things that I learned in doing this project. Specifically, postpartum depression is a very common and serious issue in America because of how often women have to immediately go back to the workforce and therefore separate from their child. And as you can see with the comment below, people often believe that this postpartum approach of traditional Chinese medicine could help with the postpartum depression. And I actually found an article that proved that the adherence and the strength of adherence actually correlated with the lessening of postpartum depression and overall physical illness as well. Now, obviously, we do not know if these research findings were causational or correlational, but Western medicine actually does approve of many of the different diets, behaviors, and overall practices in traditional Chinese medicine. For instance, Western medicine also supports a rich diet in proteins, especially for lactation. We also prioritize sleep prioritization for rest of the mother and child. And then we also limit visitors for the baby as well because of the idea of not bringing in household germs. And so there is substance behind traditional Chinese medicine, and I think that is a crucial step to recognize such validity in it if we are to, as Westerners, adopt some of these practices.
Would I do this again? Absolutely yes. I had never heard of this custom before coming to Hong Kong, but now that I've experienced it, I don't think there's any way I could go back.
As you can see in Taylor R's conclusion to her video, she had a very positive interaction with Chinese confinement. And as you can see with these two comments, a lot of Western women actually would be a huge proponent of traditional Chinese medicine because of the feel of the need for mothers to actually rest after postpartum. And in America, we are actually lacking that right now. And so that's why it's so important to preserve such heritage and diversity, is because all constituents can benefit with the variety of choices that heritage can allow. And with the accessibility of doing digital projects such as these and the learning and education of traditional Chinese medicine and other heritage, we can therefore reduce xenophobic or white superiority complexes in Western medical practices, and inherently that could improve the Western medical experience for everyone involved. And so our next step after this project would be for hospitals incorporating traditional medicines into their care because of how much this can impact the patient's comfort and feeling of understanding and even their overall health afterwards. And so we could have warm foods available for traditional Chinese medicine and other cultural implementations. And that's just overall why this project and digitization of heritage and higher accessibility is so important, is because it can affect all of us if we just choose for it to.